Aibowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum. Warm greetings to you all. I would like to sincerely welcome everyone who is joining us today via YouTube, Facebook, and Zoom. Let me begin by acknowledging that we are broadcasting from the traditional lands of the First Nations people of Australia, specifically the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our deep respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also to the elders of all other First Nations communities. I am the President of Australian Advocacy for Good Governance in Sri Lanka, AAGGSL, and I will be moderating this session. In case I have to take a quick break, Mr. Larry Marshall is waiting by the side. Thank you, Larry. My heartfelt gratitude goes out to our Executive Committee for their efforts in organizing this webinar. We extend our sincere thanks to Mr. Ranjit Veerasinghe for his technical support. He is here with us. And Mr. Siraj Perera for his assistance with the administration. The session today is organized as follows. Our first three panelists will each deliver a 10-minute presentation. Their presentations will be followed by our main panelist, who will have 20 minutes. The floor will then be open for a nearly 1 hour long discussion on important issues related to today's webinar topic. Please be brief when you're using the chat or Q&A features, and if at all possible, address your questions to a specific panelist. Likewise, panelists are encouraged to provide succinct yet comprehensive responses, with each response not exceeding 3 minutes. Let me say a few words before we start the presentations. For too long, we have lived under a system that has concentrated power, suppressed the voices of democracy, accountability, and transparency, and failed to deliver justice and equality to all Sri Lankans. Since independence, Sri Lanka's constitutional journey has passed through many phases, from the Donomo Constitution of 1931 through the Salisbury Constitution of 1948 to the Republican Constitution of 1972 and 1978. The 1978 Constitution, which introduced the executive presidency, has been one of the most damaging chapters in our history. This system has empowered individuals over institutions, presidents over parliaments, and majoritarianism over pluralism. Every election since 1977 has brought promises from politicians to abolish the executive presidency. Yet, once in power, these promises are forgotten. The reason is obvious. The system protects those who hold office, not the people. It allows unchecked executive power, limits parliamentary oversight, and centralizes authority in Colombo, while communities in the north, east, and elsewhere continue to feel excluded. We must ask ourselves a simple but profound question. What is the purpose of a constitution? A constitution is not just a legal document. It is a blueprint for governance and a reflection of our collective values. It should guarantee equality, justice, and dignity for every citizen. Sadly, in Sri Lanka, constitutions have too often been tools to entrench power rather than uphold rights. Our current constitution guarantees some fundamental rights, but it also privileges Sinhala over Tamil and Buddhism over other religions. It ignores economic and social rights, and it has failed to address the aspirations of minority communities. This flawed structure has contributed to decades of conflict and 3 separate armed uprisings in both the south and the north of the country. We must learn from other nations. In South Africa, following the end of apartheid, the constitution-making process was based on broad consultation with binding principles that ensured the protection of rights for all communities. In Nepal, despite its challenges, the process involved a directly elected constituent assembly. In Chile, even after initial failures, the country has returned to the people to determine its constitutional path. These examples show us that lasting peace and democratic stability come from inclusion and dialogue, not from backroom deals among political elites. Sri Lanka's past constitution-making processes, by contrast, have been closed-door exercises. Women, indigenous people, and marginalized communities have been largely excluded. There has been no sustained national dialogue, no consensus building, and no genuine effort to ensure that the Constitution reflects the hopes of the whole population. This must change. A new constitution must begin with wide public consultation. Every community, whether Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim, Burgher, Malay, or indigenous Vedda communities, must be heard. Workers, farmers, professionals, and the youth must also have a say. Women who have been excluded from decision making for too long must be active participants. People must feel ownership of this constitution. Otherwise, it will simply become another document gathering dust in legal libraries. At the heart of this process must be the abolition of the executive presidency. No single individual should hold such unchecked power in a democracy. Our focus should be on strengthening parliament, empowering local government, and ensuring that the state serves the people, not the other way around. We also need to fully implement the 13th Amendment and go beyond it. Devolution is not a threat to national unity, it is a pathway to inclusion. Many in the Sinhala majority areas fear devolution because it has been wrongly portrayed as a step towards separatism. But in reality, it is about empowering communities to make decisions about their own lives on education, health, land, and governance while preserving the unity of the country. Furthermore, we must guarantee robust fundamental rights. Economic, social, and cultural rights must be protected alongside civil and political rights. There should be strong safeguards for minority rights, gender equality, language rights, and the protection of the environment. Some argue that economic development should come first and that political reform can wait, but this is a false argument. Sustainable economic development cannot happen in a society that remains divided, unjust, and unstable. Political reform is not a distraction from development, it is a prerequisite for it. The NPP government has suggested it will take up constitutional reform later in its term, but history teaches us that starting too late risks failure. We have seen it before, where valuable time is lost, and as elections approach, political courage vanishes, reform gets shelved, promises are forgotten, and the same cycle repeats. This must not happen again. We have an opportunity to change the course of Sri Lanka's future, to build a new, democratic, inclusive society where every citizen feels they have a stake. This will not be easy. There will be resistance from those who benefit from the current system. There will be efforts to derail reform, but the will of the people is stronger than the fear of the few. In closing, let me say this. A constitution is not just words on paper. It is a living document. It should protect us from tyranny, guard our freedoms, and help us build a fair society. If Sri Lanka is to find peace, prosperity, and dignity for all its people, we must draft a new constitution that truly reflects our pluralistic identity. We must abolish the executive presidency, decentralize power, protect rights, and place the people, not politicians, at the heart of governance. It is time for a new beginning. Let us not waste it. Thank you. Now I will introduce the first panelist, Ms. Swasthika Arulingam. She is a lawyer and trade union leader. She has held roles at the Legal Aid Commission and played an active role in the 2022 Aragalaya protests. Ms. Arulingam has been outspoken against the Rajapaksa regime and was briefly detained in 2020 during Black Lives Matter protests. In 2021, she became the first female member of the National Labour Advisory Council, but was later excluded by the NPP government. She has continuously advocated for justice for Tamil victims of the Sri Lankan civil war. Over to Ms. Arulingam.
Thank you, Comrade Lionel. The presentation is around 10 minutes, so I thought I would touch on a few historical as well as economic developments which happened during that period, because as you very correctly said, the economy cannot be differentiated from the politics. Both go hand in hand. Just to also say, taking a note from your introduction, oftentimes when new governments come, they spend a lot of time for consultation, with public consultation and so on. And it's very important. The constitution cannot be drafted with a few experts and elites in the center. But in Sri Lanka, we have had a very broad consultation process in 2017 during the Yahapalniya government. And the current Prime Minister, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, was in that consultation committee. And she was one of the few in the entire committee. She was one of the people who gave broad sweeping recommendations, including the making the constitution secular. So, given the fact that a leader of the current government was part of this consultation process, and she was physically present in all of these consultation meetings, I think we do have adequate information on what people want. So I think the process must start, and thereafter consultations must simultaneously happen. But the process of drafting a new constitution through a broad consultative process, but the process must start, I think, because otherwise, as you said, later we will still have the executive presidency, and it will not be, it would still remain and exist in our constitution, and we will be facing another presidential election. Having said that, in 1978, it's a very it's a crisis period, not only in Sri Lanka but also across the world. A huge transformation was happening in terms of the economic structures, global economic structures, and the predominant economic model which was introduced at the time, both by Reagan as well as Thatcher, was the neoliberal economic model. Neoliberal economic model, I mean, I don't want to go into the what neoliberal economic model is, but in summary, what it means is that neoliberal economies theorize that they want the state to step out and want the state to play a minimum role when it comes to the economy. That's the summary of it. But in practice, what we see is that what the neoliberal economies want, they want the state to take a position decisively on the side of capital, opposing labor. So any laws which are brought in by the state, any regulations which are brought in by the state, neoliberal economies want that to be on the side of capital, on the side of capitalists, on the side of free flow of capital, to the detriment of everyone who comes facing the negative aspects of free market. So it is in this economic context, this global economic model, that we also found a character like Mr. J.R. Jayawardena, who of course loved power, who loved absolute power. And just like presidents who came after him, believed that one single individual can change the course of history of Sri Lanka. One individual cannot, however good the person is, however strong the leader is, however progressive the leader is, one individual cannot change a country's trajectory. It's impossible. But just like the presidents who came after him, he also believed, and also, of course, he loved absolute power, that he can actually move the country from a closed market economy to an open market economy. And for that, we needed a very strong leader. And he managed to convince the parliament to pass this, to change the constitution drastically, to change it from a parliamentary model to an executive presidential model. Now, what is this executive presidential model? To put it simply, the executive presidential model, for the first time in Sri Lanka, introduced a system where one person becomes the head of the government, can in fact have the power to convene parliament, have the power to dissolve parliament, have the power to prorogue parliament. So in effect, have the power to control parliament. This one individual is also the head of the armed force. So he's the head of the government, he's the head of the armed force. He also can unilaterally control parliament, and he also can make appointments to the higher tiers of the judiciary. So the executive president was in fact appointing the chief justice and all the Supreme Court as well as the Court of Appeal judges. So this one person stands outside the system and controls the entire formal state model in a particular country. Now, I say he stands outside the system because when the executive presidential model was brought in, it was nearly impossible to remove the president. If he becomes, if he turns out to be an authoritarian, if he turns out to be a very corrupt leader, the structures which were put in place made it almost impossible to impeach the president. So this one man was controlling the entire formal structure of the government, and as a direct result, what happened was, in the years following the executive presidential model, Sri Lanka went through a very brutal civil war, killing hundreds and thousands of people, which resulted in the genocide against the Tamil people. Sri Lanka saw the passing of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which is one of the most draconian pieces of legislation. And at the time it was passed, it was compared to the apartheid laws of South Africa. And to date, we have the Prevention of Terrorism Act in operation. And the Prevention of Terrorism Act can only exist if you have a person like the executive president, because under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the president can issue detention order. So you have the court system, the court have the power to detain someone. But outside the judicial process, you have this Prevention of Terrorism Act giving the president the power to curtail the freedoms of the citizenry of Sri Lanka in times of normalcy. It's not even in times of emergency. In times of normalcy, a president can curtail the freedoms of a citizen of Sri Lanka, which is, I think, the freedom of an individual is a fundamental principle of liberal democracy. But the executive presidential system, which exists within the liberal democratic model, in fact, circumvents this idea that freedom is non-negotiable, and through this introduction of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Then, of course, once he became the executive presidential model, he also became the head of the Mahawali Authority. And what did the Mahawali Authority do? And what did they do? They started resettling Sinhala communities in what was traditionally considered as places where Tamil and Muslim communities were residing. So the executive presidential model also became a structure through which economic tensions were intensified. And to date, we have farmers who remember the time when they were evicted from the Tamil farmers who remember a time when they were evicted from their lands, like what's happening in Gaza today. They were evicted from their lands at gunpoint with military intervention in order to make room for Sinhala farmers. So to date, we have Tamil farmers who remember these incidents and who are currently working as laborers in the farming plots of Sinhalese farmers. So the racial tensions also, in fact, after the executive presidency that we saw the 1983 riots happening. And the president did absolutely. Now, one of the rationale for introducing the executive presidential model is that this strong leader can control things, can control incidents like the 83 riots. But it was the state which sponsored and supported the 1983 riots, which directly contributed to the intensification of the civil war, which happened for the next 30 years in Sri Lanka. So these are some of the more glaring aspects of the executive presidential model. But if we see the trajectory from 1978 in Sri Lanka, what we see is two things. One is the erosion of democracy. The fact that a president can call the armed forces in times of normalcy and park them in every aspect of every place in a particular village or a particular town was normalized after the introduction of the executive presidency. A president can call on the armed forces and allow the armed forces to check ordinary civilians, even in times of normalcy. That was normalized after the executive presidential model. Corruption intensified. The fact that you can talk to the president and get something done. What we saw in full display during the Rajapaksas was normalized during the executive presidential system. And also the economic crisis, which came in 2022, it did not start in 2019. It started in 1978, when with the anchoring of this executive presidential model, we decided to open our markets without keeping any safeguards for the people of Sri Lanka to face the onslaught of this free market model, and the bankruptcy which happened in 2022 can also be directly attributed to this concentration of power in the center against a democratic sharing of power amongst the region and so on. So these are some of the glaring aspects of the executive presidency. But if I also draw your attention to what is happening right now. In 2022, a president who was seen as invincible. Now you can't remove it's almost impossible to remove the president through parliament. It's almost impossible to remove the president through by the judiciary. But a president who was seen as an invincible person was removed through an Aragali, a popular uprising. And people I don't think even scholars give enough credit to that power, the direct action, the direct democracy which people exhibited at that time. A person who was considered to be invisible, a political position which was considered to be invincible, was just thrown out within a few months, simply because people came onto the streets. And that was a very crucial moment for the politics of Sri Lanka. And I think political thinkers, scholars, legal scholars, even lawyers, I think, failed to capture that moment where we could have come together and created a discourse against the executive presidential system and removed that system from our legal structures. I think we failed to do that. We failed to capture that moment and educate people and failed to do that. And as a result, we had another presidential system. And now Mr. Anurakumara Dissanayake is the president. Now, once again, the NPP in its electoral promises said that they're going to abolish the executive presidential system. In the last 2-3 months, I have not heard a popular discourse on the abolition of the executive presidential system. So I fear that Mr. Anurakumara Dissanayake is also becoming very comfortable being the executive president, because once you come to that seat, it's a seat. It is the seat of the most highest power in the country and absolute power in the country. So you don't feel like giving it up. That happened to consecutive presidents, right? So I feel the current president also is starting to feel very comfortable in his seat. And if we as people do not put pressure to abolish the executive presidency, this we would have another cycle of presidential election, and the system will continue. My only worry is the opposition which existed to the executive presidency in 2022 does not exist now, because Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the worst. Like, he was like the, if you want to kind of put a grade to the different kinds of executive presidents, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was worst in terms of the economic situation which existed at that. I don't think in any yardstick he was the worst president, but in terms of the economic situation which existed at that time, people kind of showed their anger against that power. So I don't think that kind of anger exists at this point, because now the economic oppression and the economic dispossession which is happening is much more invisible, so that we don't really see it in open. We don't see people in queues for standing for petrol. So it's more invisible. So therefore, the anger is not towards the executive presidency, so to speak. But that should not prevent us from holding the NPP government accountable for the electoral promises. And we should not, as Comrade Liner said, we should not wait for 5 years for the executive presidential system to be abolished, because if we wait for 5 years, the next president is also going to come and say, I will abolish the executive president when I come to power, and then we'll see another 5 years. So I think it is time that we start pressuring the government to move for a constitutional reform, and that constitutional reform must focus. I mean, I would say, even if that constitutional reform singularly focuses on abolishing the executive presidency, that is good for now. We don't have to complicate things about various other things. I think it should singularly focus on abolishing this power structure which has corrupted our economic as well as our political model for this long. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arulingam. And yeah, your presentation raised a couple of important points. Why the executive presidency was established, and how it has affected all spheres of the country, including legal, judicial, and executive areas. And also, you suggested that the discussions about abolishing executive presidency should start now rather than wait till later. And so thank you very much for that contribution. And I know you have to leave a bit early, but if you could stay at least for the initial discussion period, we would very much appreciate it. Okay, thank you again. And now I will introduce Ms. Ermiza Tegal. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. And she's a lawyer and human rights activist specializing in civil liberties, minority rights, and gender-based violence. She holds a law degree from the University of London and a master's degree from the School of Oriental and African Studies, London. She was a fellow at Harvard Law School. Ms. Tegal co-founded the Muslim Personal Law Reform Action Group and serves on the boards of the Women's Resource Center and the Muslim Women's Research and Action Forum. She also advises on law reform and has published widely on civil rights and the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Over to you, Ms. Tegal.
Thank you, Lano. I think my presentation, 10 minutes, would also continue from what Swasthika said. I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about the broad power, the immense, massive amount of power that was deposited in the executive presidency when J.R. Jayawardena first designed it, right? And basically creating, and it is well accepted now that it creates a constitutional dictatorship at the time. And over the decades, I think the people of Sri Lanka have been really trying to bring back that power into their hands. So what we're seeing is through various amendments to the constitution, it's been a really trying process where we are unable to hold this office with so much power to account. So the broad, immense power in the office of the president has been instrumental for where the country is today. If we look at, and Swasthika mentioned this, if you just look at just the amount of power in relation to the violence the state has in its hands, if I may share this to show that ever since the executive presidency was introduced in 1978, designed in 1978, we've had immediately thereafter the Prevention of Terrorism Act that was enacted, which primarily puts hands of power, and I would say violence, state violence, in the hands of the president, the military, the armed forces, and the police. We also have, from time to time, we've lived in a country since the executive presidency, and this is not the only impact. This is only the impact of the violent nature of power that rests with the presidency. We've lived from 80 to 83, 83 to 2001, primarily in a state of emergency. Even more recently, from time to time, we see ourselves in states of emergency, and the most recent with the Arulingam, the people's uprising, the people demanding a change, a system change. We see the response from essentially the president is one of violence. Immediately after the July 17th, 18th declaration of a state of emergency, we see the Galle Face cleared with military force of the protesters that were occupying that area without weapons, peacefully, but a military brutal attack on protesters immediately after the calling of a state of emergency. So when we look at, in any event, in any country, the monopoly on this kind of power over force or violence is with the state. But when we look at how it has been designed for Sri Lanka from the very inception of this constitution that governs us today, and the very compact that the people have with the government, it is one which is extremely disproportionate. The power is very much with the president to decide and to repress the voice of the people. As a consequence of this emergency and PTA and the way in which it has been wielded against any kind of dissent, even against the JVP, even against any kind of political dissent, even against minorities, those who have written against the government, expressed any kind of opposing view, from time to time, this is the power that has been wielded. We also see at a very micro level, the level of police violence. And I think we should understand that also, as when the executive is so powerful, the executive arm also wields that kind of power for political purposes, right? And there are lots of relationships, complex relationships of power and how it is used and why it is used, but basically creating a politics of fear amongst the populace. and a subordination of particularly poor working class identities that are marginalized, identities that are numerically minorities. There is a suppression and a use of power and violence against such minorities. So when we think about the executive presidency, we have to reflect on the level of power and how it has been used in terms of the violence which it has wielded against Sri Lankan people. So when the Constitution of Sri Lanka talks about the fact that sovereignty lies in the people, this is not what we see. We see governments coming into power at elections, popularly being elected, and thereafter the people being marginalized. So in the interest of garnering that vote, there are popular promises being given, and the abolishing of the executive presidency has always been one of them. During Chandrika's time, during President Chandrika Bandaranake's time, during Mahinda Rajapaksha's time, we have seen this promise consistently being given to say, we will come into power and abolish the presidency. They are voted into power, and the executive presidency, the power in the presidency is not abolished. So it is also, in terms of process for today, very important to understand that the process needs to start immediately upon taking of power, that the mandate given by the people is reflected in the immediate workings of the government. I want to talk a little bit about also, as on one hand, we have the violence, and on the other hand, we've had an entire machinery that has been working in the interest or with the agenda of the incoming presidents, incoming governments, right? So with the executive presidency that was introduced by Jayarjavardhana, we have an elite agenda that Swasthika spoke about in terms of also economic policy coming into play. We have law upon law that was enacted that privileges certain classes over others. So we have, most recently, I think we have the Economic Transformation Act, we have attempts at various labor laws, various things that have been enacted and created and built an institution, a mechanism that has marginalized the popular voice. So when we talk in the Constitution about the people, we need to think about who these the people are, because the entire government institution that deals with people has been designed on an elite agenda. We see state capture today dictating what the economic policy ought to be, resisting every time there is demands made by the working class, the plantation workers, by landless people of Sri Lanka for rights and demanding those rights. The only way in which we see an actual the people is when we see strikes, unions working to mobilize individuals, working people. And that is the popular power of the people. We see it in the protests that people have organized and engaged in from time to time to ensure that the accountability that is placed in the government is like that they can hold accountable those individuals in government. And we have seen also from time to time how the president particularly has wielded so much power that broad national or executive action has been taken that affects the entire country. So for a small example being the fertilizer crisis, right? Where there's one decision that can affect everything. We have seen from time to time where government could take action to benefit popular voice. So there should have been a response to land issues. There should have been a response to plantation workers asking for a mere decent living wage. There should have been responses to exploitation of working classes, including garment workers, informalized labor that is removed from the protections of labor law, which the government is responsible for stepping in and ensuring that that power balance is maintained between the employer and the employee, right? Let me stop sharing this slide for a moment. So we see on the one hand, immense power, which is so forceful, so violent deposited in the executive presidency. And on the other hand, we see this elite agenda that has created a structure which also then excludes these marginalized voices. So which I think this is the reason why we see minorities unable in this system that is very much directed by an executive presidency, because they're built on popular support, to accommodate the views, the aspirations, the demands of minority voices. Those could be ethnic minorities, religious minorities, women within religious minorities like Muslim women's rights, again, plantation workers, landless, those with marginalized identities in Sri Lanka, vulnerable identities, and the poor in general. So those voices do get marginalized and suppressed as a result of the system that we have built. When we look at this, when we look at the executive presidency with this kind of lens, we need to understand that what is before us is an urgent need. This government comes into power on the cry of the people for an abolishing of the executive presidency. That was a main ask during the Aragalaya across the country. One of the main asks of the people, and the main reason that faith was placed in this change that was sought to be brought about, was the fact that the executive presidency would be abolished to represent this change. And that cannot be left for later. It has to be a conversation that is started very early on in the coming into power, because you need to garner the support of all who are not just the people, but also the political parties involved. It is a very intense process that cannot be kept to the last stages of the term of either the parliament or the president. It is important also, and I will end on this, to understand that because we've had a long history of violence coming also from the state towards its people, and then this country that has been built on an elite agenda with structures that have only a certain small class of people's interests at heart, we really need to start changing that culture. So to deepen democracy, to truly reflect democracy, we need to address the question of the presidential or the executive presidency. And that conversation, I think we do not sometimes understand as citizens how much of our freedoms have been eroded, how much of our voice is not heard, and how much individuals live in fear of the state even today on an everyday basis. I work with victims of torture. It is something that you see every day. The Human Rights Commission last year said that they received 700 complaints of torture, and which means that 2 complaints of torture per day. And we know that that is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many who don't complain. So in a country where citizens have such an eroded sense, diminished sense of what their fundamental rights are, what freedom looks like, what liberty looks like, and what development of their lives is possible, it is very important to start the structural change part early on. And part of that structural change is the abolishing of the executive presidency. I will end on that note.
Thank you, Ms. Tegal, for that presentation. And you described, or you clarified the timeline of the executive presidency, and how after establishment of the executive presidency, at every election, there was a promise by the opposition to abolish it, but it never happened. And you also highlighted how executive presidency has affected the communities, the peace, and the economy of the country, and how it has been used. The executive presidential system has been used by the president to marginalize all other voices of dissent. Thank you. Now it is over to Mr. Kumarapperuma. Mr. Upul Kumarapperuma, President's Counsel, is a leading Sri Lankan lawyer specializing in civil, criminal, and constitutional law. He serves as a member of the governing councils of the National Institute of Business Management and the University of Peradeniya. He is also a member of the Executive Committee of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and the Asian Litigators Forum on Torture. Previously, he served in the executive of the Asian Alliance Against Torture. He contested parliamentary elections under the National People's Power. He is also active in human rights advocacy, including anti-torture initiatives. Thank you, Mr. Kumarapperuma. Over to you.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. I have gathered 5 points from the presentations made by Swasthika and Ermiza. Three are basically, out of that 5 points, three points are basically it deals with the history. Number one is history means that those situations have been created from 1978. Issue number one is concentration of power with one person. That is the crux of the 1978 constitution, because the entire power in the constitution is given to one person, who is the executive president, and all the other institutions have become powerless with that power concentration. So, as mentioned by Swasthika and Ermiza, the first point is the power concentration with one person, and the other issue number two is weakened parliamentary democracy because of the powers vested with one person. He is the head of the state, he is the head of the government, and he holds all the he controls all the positions of the government. So, parliament, legislature has become basically it has become a non-entity. And issue number three is, it is very vital issue. Both Ermiza and Swasthika talked about this. That is ethnic and religious tensions because of the power concentration of one person. As example, I can say, now with the centralized nature of the presidency can alienate minority groups, because he can alienate minority groups if the president thinks he would favor the interest of the majority. So you can simply ignore the interest of the minorities. So these three issues, I think these three issues have triggered 2022 Aragale. Because what are the other two issues? Those were popped up at Aragale. Number one is economic and governance failure. So what happened was, after getting power, Gotabaya Rajapaksa has introduced his own governance principles, own economic principles to the country. As example, I can say how he had introduced the organic fertilizer concept. So like that, he has introduced his own governance structure, own economic policy, and as a result of that, there was a serious erosion of the economy, serious erosion of the social fabric of the country, and serious economic erosion of all the sectors of the country. So this situation has become, as mentioned by mentioned by both Swasthika and Ermiza, that is because of the centralized power. That is because of centralized power. Time to time, we have done amendments to the constitution. We wanted to dilute the arbitrariness of the constitution. As a result of that, 17th Amendment came to effect. But whenever there is a strong government, again, the government itself switch to the arbitrariness with the another amendment. 17th Amendment came to effect when there was a weakened government, and after getting power by Mahinda Rajapaksa, he introduced 18th Amendment, and again with the weak government, 19th Amendment came to effect, and again with a strong government, that is Gotabaya government, 20th Amendment came to effect. So like that, they concentrated power whenever there is a strong government with some kind of amendment. The president himself concentrated power with him. So as a result of that, the a poor political vision of the president, poor economic vision of the then president, the Aragalaya, economic crisis, and the other all failures of the nation or state has come to the surface. And he had to leave the country he had to leave the office because of that. And again, thereafter, Ranil Wickremesinghe came to power. Ranil Wickremesinghe came to power with the consensus of the parliament. So what Ranil Wickremesinghe did was, he tried to stabilize the government. He did it to a certain extent. As Swasthika very correctly mentioned, what economic stability is not itself sufficient to run a country. That is what you said. So what happened to Ranil Wickremesinghe? Even though he had stabilized the economy to a certain extent, he couldn't regain power. That is because the public demand. There was a public demand for accountability, public demand for fundamental rights, securing fundamental rights, public demand for honoring the democratic values. What Ranil Wickremesinghe did was, after becoming the president, he has crushed the Aragalaya. Very recently, there's a judgment given against him, holding that he has violated the fundamental rights of the protesters. So those five factors altogether clearly shows that the arrogance, arbitrariness, and authoritarian nature of the executive presidency. That authoritarian nature or arrogance or arbitrariness is given by the law, given by the constitution. It is given by the constitution. So, as we have there's a serious debate or dialogue from 1978 to today to abolish the executive presidency and to introduce more favorable constitution to the people of this country. So it is necessary to go for that amendment or go for that reform at present, because this is the I think this government is the only government who will be able to fulfill that reform. So because there are certain other reasons to do that by the NPP government. One, the first reason is the JVP. The JVP is a part of the NPP government. JVP was the worst victim of this authoritarian presidency. Their party was banned, their movement was crushed, and the JVP were the worst victim of the authoritarian presidency. So they have a duty. That is in their manifesto as well. They have a duty to abolish the presidency. So this is my first presentation. I have to leave early because I am in Singapore. I have come for a special purpose. I will be leaving around half an hour time. Is it all right, Mr. Bopage?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kumarapperuma. You highlighted several aspects of executive presidency, how historically it was established and how it has affected the communities, and how it has led to arrogance and arbitrariness of the governance. And you also emphasized the necessity to abolish the executive presidency.
Because it is in the manifesto of the NPP, and we have been vouching that for a long period of time. That is one of the main slogans of the NPP as well as the JVP, that we are going to abolish the executive presidency. And Mrs. Dr. Harini Amarasuriya as well as Mr. Lal Vijayanayake were the committee members. Lal Vijayanayake headed that committee. They are the committee members of the committee appointed during the Yapalan time to for the new constitution. So that is our position.
Okay. So thank you very much again. And we'll move on to Dr. Jayampati Vikramaratne. He's also President's Counsel and a senior legal scholar and former MP with expertise in public law, human rights, and constitutional reform. He holds 2 PhDs, one for his thesis, Fundamental Rights in Sri Lanka from the University of Peradeniya, and the other from the University of Colombo for his published work, Democratic Governance in Sri Lanka, a Constitutional Ceremony. Dr. Vikramaratne was a key figure in drafting Sri Lanka's 19th Amendment and Right to Information Act, and a member of the team that drafted the Constitution of the Republic of Sri Lanka Bill of year 2000. He has extensive experience in the legal sector of Laos, having undertaken several assignments for the UNDP, UNODC, and the European Union. He has also worked in Papua New Guinea. Over to Dr. Jayampati Vikramaratne.
Thank you, Lionel, for this opportunity. I will use a PowerPoint presentation. We're talking about the abolition of the executive presidency in relation to a new constitution. That is the topic of the discussion. So before coming to the abolition, I would like to state my views on the essential features of a new constitution. One is the supremacy of the constitution in law and in practice, that all state action inconsistent with the constitution should be deemed void and judicially reviewable, which is not the case now. We don't have post-enactment judicial review. For example, after a bill is passed, it cannot be challenged. Rulings of parliament cannot be challenged. Not only legislation, even, for example, an unconstitutional ruling of a speaker or a committee or a motion which is unconstitutional cannot be challenged. But the global trend now is to review even non-legislative acts of the legislature, such as motions and rulings. The 2015-19 Constitutional Assembly, which is very crucial to our discussion, the Fundamental Rights Subcommittee of that process, I was a member of that subcommittee, proposed bringing all state action, including judicial action, legislative action, all state action, and even non-state action within the fundamental rights jurisdiction of the judiciary. Then another essential feature, of course, apart from the abolition, is devolution of power to the lowest possible level based on the principle of subsidiarity. That is, whatever could be handled by the lowest tier should be vested in it. A fundamental rights chapter that is more broader than the present one, which is restricted to civil and political rights. While broadening the scope of civil and political rights that we have, I suggest that we include social and economic rights, cultural rights, rights of children, women, the disabled and the elderly, and environment rights. The constitutional code, because this new structure that we are talking about would have, various constitutional issues are likely to arise. And to deal with them, it is best that we have a specialized court. And therefore, I would advocate strongly a constitutional court. Electoral reform, about which I will talk presently. Now, the NPP, JVP, which is in power, what are the positions that they have taken? The JVP has been unconditionally for the abolition of the executive presidency. I say EP, executive presidency. In the 2015-19 process in which the JVP very actively participated in the steering committee as well as the subcommittees, in the report of the steering committee, JVP stated his own position separately and called for the complete abolition of the executive presidency. In regard to electoral reform, and this is important, in 2018, at that time, they were for the final outcome of a mixed electoral system to be proportional. That you can have a mixture of FPP and PR, but the final outcome must be proportional. If the executive presidency is to be abolished, the JVP at that time proposed that the governor's powers should be increased. In the 2024 manifesto last year, the present governing party, coalition, made a very important statement that a process, the 2015-19 process will be completed. I mean, of course, you cannot complete that because that parliament is no more. But of course, what I gather, what they mean is to have a similar process. That is where parliament appoints the constitutional assembly consisting of all parliamentarians. They achieve consensus and come out with a draft. And once that is drafted, available, is discussed in the country, then it is brought to parliament. And parliament, acting under the provisions of the present constitution, passes it by a 2/3 majority. And if a referendum is needed, a referendum will be held. That's a very good process. And abolition of the executive presidency was promised last year, and devolution of political and administrative power to every local government, district, and province, so that all people can be involved in governance within one country. So that was those are the proposals. Rather, the elective, what the manifesto said. Now, in a program aired over the Sirasa in late December, I think it's the 30th or 31st of December last year, the President Disanayake was asked about the executive presidency. He said, yes, we are for the executive presidency, but there are certain issues that have to be sorted out. Now, in 2016-17, they were for for proportional representation, even if there is a mixed system, that the final outcome should be proportional. But now they have taken a different position. That he said that parliament is not stable. Government would not have a comfortable majority under the proportional representation system. And therefore, if you go to a mixed system, or rather, I would put it like this, that no state parliament is stable under PR, and therefore it has to be there should be electoral reform when abolishing the executive presidency. Now, this is not what they said earlier, but let's take it. They are the ruling party. They are the party that has a 2/3 majority. So we need to respond to that, what the government says. Now, President Disanayake then said that there are certain difficulties in going to a mixed system. One is ensuring representation of different opinions, shades of opinion and communities would be challenging under FPP. He took the example of the Muslims in the Kurunegala district. He said Muslim has never been elected from Kurunegala, although they have a sizable population, not to parliament, except this time one of the NPP candidates won. In a mixed system, he said, constituencies are fewer. Now, if you remember, before in 90s, last time we had elections under the FPP was in 1977. There were 160 constituencies, returning 168 MPs, including the multi-member constituencies. We go by those electoral divisions. So, in a mixed system, the constituencies will have to come down. Number will have to come down because it is mixed. And he says the representation of some communities may be difficult. He took the example of Seruvilla, which was carved out in 1975 to render possible the representation of the Sinhalese in Seruvilla, in the Trincomalee district. And he also took the case of Gaul. Gaul district has various castes. Although he said, I don't believe in that, but then the reality is that those caste issues are there. He said so. And there have been carved out certain, for example, he did not name them, but I suppose he referred to Balapiti, Ambalangoda, and the other one, Karandeniya. which were carved out to render possible the representation of caste. So these were the problems he raised. And in my presentation, I will deal with them and show that actually there are good answers to this, that this can be sorted out. Now, before that, I want to deal with, refer to a set of proposals made by the Collective for Democracy and Rule of Law, which Professor Jadev Uyanguda convened. I was a member, and there were professionals and academics in it. They suggested a 200-member parliament, mixed system, 130 FPP MPs on the basis of seats, including multi-member constituencies and smaller constituencies. Now, under the 72 Constitution and the Salisbury Constitution, the Delimitation Commission could carve out multi-member constituencies and smaller constituencies, smaller than the others in the province, to facilitate the representation of groups of shared interests like caste and racial interests. The collective proposed 60 PR, either national or provincial. 50 seats to be filled by PR. Then, to ensure that the smaller parties and the smaller, some of the communities have their small parties, if any party is unable to get a seat from the FPP allocation or the PR allocation, 10 would be set apart through national PR for smaller parties which cannot secure a seat, which were not able to secure a seat from any of the above two categories. Now, that was a 200-member parliament. In a 225-member parliament, that would translate into 146 FPP, 68 PR, and 11 for small parties. One could even think of giving more seats to FPP, 150, 65, 10. Those are possibilities. These have to be discussed. Now, regarding voting for people voting for candidates of their communities and castes, I must say it has not been always the case. Take the Balapitiya electorate, which always returned a candidate of a particular caste. In 1964, December, Lakshman de Silva voted to defeat the crossover with CP de Silva and helped to defeat the SLSP coalition. At the next election, the LSSP nominated Mr. LC de Silva, who was from Ambalangud, from a different caste. And the people of Balapitiya punished Lakshman and elected LC de Silva from a different caste. So they took politics into consideration. Batticaloa in 1970, the multi-member seat in Batticaloa was carved out to ensure representation of a Tamil and Muslim. But in 1970, there were two strong Muslim candidates, Makan Maka and MC Rahman. And the votes were split between the two Muslim candidates and both lost. The Muslims surely knew that a split would deny Muslim representation. But they preferred voting according to their political convictions. And of course, as a result, both seats went to the Tamils. These show that voters do not always vote for candidates from their own communities, caste or otherwise. And more voters are now more mature and they more vote, I would argue that they now vote more on political consideration. So how do we address President Dissanayaka's concerns? So what I've suggested, what the collective suggested and what I suggested on the basis of that. So a majority of FPP seats would ensure stability. The proposed system can be used to ensure representation of various interests. For example, in Kurunagala, the example the President Dissanayaka took, a party could attract Muslim voters under the proposed system by placing a Muslim candidate high up in the PR list from Kurunagala. Similarly, a Tamil party, or any party rather, could place a candidate from a depressed community, which is an issue. The representation of depressed communities is an issue in the north. place a candidate from a depressed community high up in the PR list and therefore attract voters from those depressed communities and ensure representation. So MMCs, multi-member constituencies and smaller constituencies, as I said, were there in 47 and 72. The total number of FPP seats in the whole country are divided not according to districts. Seats are not allocated to Trincomalee. They are allocated to the Eastern Province. So there is a lot of flexibility. So from among the number of FPP MPs that will be elected from the Eastern Province, Seruvila could be carved out as a small electorate to facilitate singular representation. Similarly, where this caste issue comes, mainly in Gaul and Tegal, even Tegal, Aranaka is now was carved out earlier for that, to ensure or to render possible. I won't use the word ensure, but to render possible, make possible the representation of such communities. And multi-member constituencies in Berula, Harispattua, and Potuville. Then this other issue, which the JVP had raised in the 2015-19 process, abolition, strengthening the governor's powers. Now, I argue that fears for abolition endangers the territorial unity of a country are baseless. The powers of the center would be unaffected by the form of government. Whether you have parliamentary form or whether you have executive presidency, it is what the powers of the center that matter. But I concede that there are people who are worried about. When a fair percentage of people have this worry, we need to address that. So the 2000 bill, which I helped to draft, and the 2016 steering committee report, of which I was again a member, we proposed this. And the Tamil parties agreed to this. Even the Tamil parties agreed to it. Where a provincial administration promotes armed rebellion or insurrection or intentionally violates the constitution, presenting a clear and present danger to the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the country, the center may, by proclamation, take over all or any powers of the provincial council and, if necessary, dissolve the provincial council. So rather than making the powers making the governor still stronger, what is needed is to have provisions which can be used in a situation. We have used the word at that time, clear and present danger, coming from American jurisprudence. I don't want to go into that. Clear and present danger, not because just some fool of a chief minister makes a foolish statement, but if there's a clear and present danger to the territorial integrity of the country, sovereignty, the center could intervene and take over certain powers. But to prevent arbitrary use, the proclamation must be approved by Parliament and also subject to judicial review. That you don't have to say. Last week, the Supreme Court said under the 19th Amendment that even the declaration of an emergency can be reviewed by the Supreme Court. So now, the NPP has a clear two-thirds majority, but a bill would require the approval of the people at a referendum. And the NPP has committed itself to the 2015-19 style reform process that is through Parliament. Such a process is going to be long. I was part of that process in 2015-16. I know the very bad experiences we have. It takes a long time because it's not the 156 or 159 MPs only who make the constitution. The matter has to go to the people. And electoral reform involves very hard bargaining. Again, speaking from experiences, the 1995, I joined in 1996 to 2000 process. We had the Select Committee met 99 times. We could have discussed electoral reform, I don't know how many times, but still we were unable to agree on electoral reform. And therefore, the 2000 bill did not make new proposals. It just replicated the 2000 provision, 1978 provisions, which was one of the big defects of that constitution. So I will conclude by saying that we must act now. The government must act now. Delay increases the danger of a referendum becoming a referendum on the government's performance rather than one on the constitutional bill. As we go to the end of the parliament period, opposition parties become spoilers. They become more opportunities opportunistic, as Mr. Ryan Wickramasinghe did in 2000, agreed to the constitution, agreed to the most of the constitution, and finally burned it in parliament. So the more you delay, the chances of this not happening are greater. So electoral and devolution should not be an excuse, I urge, for retaining the executive presidency. I want to conclude by using a Sinhala saying, නොකරන වෙදකමට ගොනුරු තෙල් හත් පට්ටයකුත් තව ටිකක්වත් ඕනේ කිව්වා. English translation is that, a village physician claimed that he could cure a second patient, but asked of course he was conning, he asked the family to bring 7 measures of the oil of ice flies, or the small flies. And when they found 7 measures, they said, I need a little more. And when they brought that, they said, I need a little more. So he gave excuses not to, he finally gave excuses and did not do anything. So the bill can be, I can understand the NPP wanting to continue with the executive powers for this term. Well and good, it's okay. Let's agree on that. Let Mr. Dissanayake be the executive president for his whole first term, this term rather. So the bill can be passed now, and executive we can have a transitional provision that it would be abolished in 2019, so that he has the full term. So there are enough and ways of doing it if you have the political will. And delay will open the government to accusations that indulges in a nokarana vedakam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wickramasinghe. And I think your presentation dealt with many aspects about the policy of the NPP and how they are developing their positions currently, and whether actually they are intending to abolish it. I think from all the indications, the NPP, they want to abolish it, but I don't know whether that would be possible if they continue to delay the consultation and inclusion process. Anyway, now we have to come to the discussion session, and we have only about 35 minutes left. I mean, after the 2 hours. Initially, we had a 10-minute delay. Before we start the Q&A session, I would like to make an announcement, and I will share the screen. This is with regard to about the civil rights movement in Sri Lanka. It's Sri Lanka's first human rights organization, and it was founded in response to state violence during the April 1971 insurrection. Since then, it has held successive governments accountable for their human rights obligations. Civil rights movements have addressed issues such as constitutional reform, emergency rule, torture, migrant labor, and capital punishment, many of which remain relevant today. Its work highlights the long-standing tradition of human rights activism in Sri Lanka and offers valuable insights for students, activists, and policymakers. Now, a new publication is being finalized, covering civil rights movement's interventions from 1971 to 81, including topics like civic rights, judicial appointments, and constitutional changes. Mr. Mirak Rahim of the Center, he was previously affiliated with Center for Policy Alternatives, and Ms. Renuka Senanayake, solicitor in Victoria, she was also previously associated with Center for Policy Alternatives. They are compiling this publication. They are seeking your support to complete this project. We at Australian Advocacy for Good Governance in Sri Lanka would greatly appreciate your contribution. And if you are interested, please let me know, then I can send the details. Thank you. Now, moving on to the Q&A session, I will go by the order in which people raise their hands. And we have only 2 presenters to respond. Mr. Upul Kumarapperuma and Ms. Swasthika Arulingam, as they had to leave early. First of all, I will read a comment made by Dr. Dhammika Herath. He has said, he has put his Q&A. Abolition of executive presidency itself will lead us nowhere. We need a new constitution based on principles all Lankans can agree. It should separate three arms of government and explicitly secular. Would like to hear panel's opinions. So, if both of you are able.
Yeah, if I respond first, I'm
Yeah.
completely for a secular constitution. I've always said that. Having said that, because Buddhism has been given this place, the reality is that it will require a lot of discussion, a lot of concessions on the parts of various people, on the part of various groups that advocate and oppose it. And it's going to be very difficult, but it is not impossible. So we need to discuss this. But let again, the secular nature not being there should not be a nokarana vedakama for the abolition of the executive presidency. So I am for both abolition and, but they are not mutually. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have both rather, but you can also have abolition, but preferably with going to a secular state.
Thank you. Ermiza, any?
Yes, I mean, it can be a quick response. I also agree that there's many things to be done, but I wouldn't say that abolition of the executive presidency, as Dr. Heratha said, will lead us nowhere. I think it is a very essential a part of what needs to be done. It's a very essential component without which really the other aspects will suffer. So we have to get these building blocks right. The compact with the people, the social contract needs to be designed. And in that designing, I think Dr. Jayanpati put down so much of the specifics in what that vision could look like in a constitution. We have to accept that we have a constitution that we are very unhappy with. And I think once we have that acceptance and understanding of why we're very unhappy with it as a people, one of the first things that we would want to, and I think there's broad sort of based agreement that abolition of the executive presidency is a must. Having said that, I'm fully in agreement that we need a new constitution that has separation of powers. And I would definitely say that secularism is something that conversation needs to start. And one of the reasons why it has been hard is because a populist culture in politics has kind of promoted these ideas that people are now clinging on very strongly to. And breaking away from that, untangling that attachment to these ideas does take time. So, but I agree with the things that need to be done that Dr. Heratha has raised.
Thank you both, Dr. Kumarapperuma and Mr. Tegal. Now, there is another comment made by, or rather question, by Professor Sivanandan Sarasanan. I don't have the full name, sorry. Just Professor Sivanandan Sarathanandaraja. Sorry. How can push the government strongly if the government keep on delaying the process? Okay, before coming to the panelists, I would like to share the screen. I hope you can see the screen. This is a suggestion made by the solicitor in Victoria. He is a very strong activist in the Tamil community. I will just read this first and then let us discuss. I think it is relevant to that question. That is why I put that on. One of the key promises of the NPP, and particularly its presidential candidate, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, was that if elected to power, they would implement the 13th Amendment to the Constitution pending the enactment of a new one by consultation with all sections of the community, aimed at resolving the long-standing ethnic conflict as well. There are no steps towards implementation of the 13th Amendment, which is law of the country. No enthusiasm is given to the single member bill to have it passed early despite the two-thirds majority hold, to remove any legal impediment to conduct the provincial council elections, which now is postponed to next year. The enactment of a constitution is shelved and is muted, except continuing promises it would be done, and at times that it may be taken up towards the end of the government's current term. All constitutions so far enacted by the governments have been those that suited the agendas of the political parties and not centered on the people or accountability to the people. For proper governance, it is imperative that a constitution which reflects the aspirations of the people to be enacted, and it cannot be left to yet another government to hijack it to its political goals. It is necessary for the communities to exercise their power over the politicians, to be accountable to the statements they make, have them commit to them, and as well expose their making use of such sentiments to obtain power. When it is done, then do not bother about it. People will have to exercise their rights here, apart from voting. Civil societies that are concerned with the just governance in Sri Lanka should take steps to assemble and establish a body structure to examine the various proposals and drafts that have been done during the turbulent days of the country by several well-meaning civil societies locally or internationally, or even parliaments which were converted to constitutional assemblies, and then to draw a proposed draft as that of the people as a model one, calling upon the government to have that enacted as the will of the people. So that was one suggestion. So I will go to the panelists now. If you
Well,
could.
I have no objection to, and I would actually support civil society taking such initiatives. As regards drafts and proposals, there are enough and more drafts. We have the 2000 draft, we have the APRC panel, we have the experts panel, we have the Lal Vijayanagara Harani Amarasuriya report, which is very good. As Mr. Kumarapperuma said, we have enough and more. What is needed is political will on the part of the government. But yes, why don't we start talking outside Parliament? We can't produce a constitution, but we can pressurize the government. So that's a very good idea. I would support that. I think civil society should now, because of the delay in the government. Of course, yesterday, Miss Amarasuriya, Dr. Amarasuriya in Parliament said that they have not forgotten the constitutional amendment process, which is very good. But also we need action, right? But doing it in the fourth year, I've heard this, we'll do it in the fourth year. It's not going to happen. So we need to start the process. So parallel to that, yes, we can also have a civil society. We can also have civil society action.
Thank you.
If I might add to that, just to say that as much as civil society, and we also look at who that is, talks about these, and we, as Dr. Jampati said, there are so many drafts, so many ideas, so many proposals, and good ones at that. I do think there's a real need to popularize these ideas broadly amongst the people. Sometimes it is reverberating within this so-called civil society spaces and the expert spaces, and to get people on board make them to have people understand what it means to their day-to-day lives it will make a difference, I think, in the long run.
Thank you. Okay, there is another question by Mr. Sundaresan. Thanks for the opportunity. Why always Malaya Tamil community out of legal frame means we can't access the basic rights like land rights, water and sanitation, education, etc. Even Pradeshya Sabha amendment, there are restrictions. Why Prevention of Terrorism Act? Mostly or almost all the time against numerically less community. The executive president mostly affects numerically less community people in Sri Lanka. So there is a question and a comment. So
yeah, Malay. I mean, as a person I was born in Kandy, in where we lived with in the state area, worked in the Lanka State Workers Union, the LSSB trade union in Hebat. So I know that I consider myself somebody who understands, who's very, very sympathetic to that community. They are not even considered, they are recognized as a separate community by some people. Some people say, no, they're Tamil. And they have argued. I have argued, no, they are culturally different. Even that distinction is not accepted. But now it's becoming a little better, thanks also to the community itself, its activists, and I must say also political leaders who have taken up this issue. And that is why I say, and their representation is very important. And when we talk about devolution, we might have to think of new structures for such communities. And I think in the APRC experts panel, we propose such a structure. I think Professor Disavitharana's APRC report also proposes such a structure. And the recognition of economic, social, and cultural rights in a constitution will go a long way to assuage, or rather to deal with some of these issues that are faced by such communities. Of course, also the marginalized communities in Sri Lanka, like for example, take Monragala, Buttala, those areas. The indices are comparable to the indices in Mullaitivu and Mana. So I'm in complete agreement with.
Do you have anything to add?
Just to add that I do work closely with also the workers, plantation workers, and in terms of the Malayalam community, in terms of a political identity also, I think I think that recognition of the exclusion is really now established, and the fact that there really needs to be some urgent response is very clear. I think in the laws that even Mr. Sundaresan has raised, it's like I said before, there's so much in terms of the laws that have excluded people, provisions that exclude particular communities that need to be dismantled, and we need to look at our legal frameworks to understand what is terrorizing certain communities, certain identities, certain individual groups, and what is disadvantaging certain groups, and start dismantling these legal exclusions, legal permissions that are given to a state to also cause fear to certain groups.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment with regard to Mr. Sundaresan's a comment he has made about the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Now, Prevention of Terrorism Act came a bit later in 1978, as far as I remember, but it was based, its characteristics came originally under the Criminal Justice Commissions Act in 1972. It was based on the similar act in South Africa under the apartheid regime. And most of the features that went against the normal judicial practices were prominent features in the Criminal Justice Commissions Act. And it was used against the communities in the South. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm not excluding what you said, but what I'm just adding to that. Next, there's a comment by Comrade Brito Fernando, and he has made two comments, so I will just use both so that you can respond to both of them. Other than few in the society, the majority of public is not that interested in abolishing the executive presidency. Whatever we did, we failed in making a public opinion. So abolishing executive presidency is a discussion only among few activists. Though the demand comes out as a slogan in every election, the majority does not care in demanding what the rulers promised when in the opposition. Second comment is, there are three. During Aragalaya, through some activists put out the slogan, abolition of executive presidency. Yet after Aragalaya, why that voice did fail? Even Rani WS, I think.
Panellists.
They are without any opposition at the executive president. He also has added, when Mr. Jayampati was in the government during 2015-2019 period, what efforts he made in abolishing the executive presidency and what are the main opposition he faced?
I think I'll
Yeah, please.
answer that question specifically mentioned in my name. Well, I was part of I mean, if you know about me, I'm a member of the Lanka, I have been a member of the Lanka Samajak Party, and we have always stood for the abolition of executive presidency. I was in the drafting team of the 19th Amendment. Our initial agreement, I mean, the parties that supported Maithripala Sirisena, the initial agreement signed at Vihara Mahadevi Park was to abolish the executive presidency completely. And I and Professor Nirmal Devasiri, we drafted most of that agreement. And the following day, the very following day, Mr. Sirisena went and signed a separate MOU with the Jatika Helomurumaya of Champigaranavaka, where Champigaranavaka got Sirisena to agree that no constitutional amendment requiring a referendum will be brought. So Sirisena probably did not know what he was signing, right? So that put a real roadblock into it. And he somehow it went into manifestos. And therefore, an abolition would have required, complete abolition would have required a referendum. Of course, I'm in a small group of lawyers who argue that a referendum is not necessary, but that is not the majority opinion. The Supreme Court has said an abolition is, for abolition, a two-thirds majority is not sufficient. A referendum has to be held. So we were constrained. That's a very good question. We were constrained by Mr. Sirisena's own manifesto and his promise that he gave to the JHU. And that is why we could not go that far to abolish the presidency in the 19th Amendment. So we had to be constrained. So that, because he promised the country that he will not bring an amendment which will require a referendum. But in the 2015-19 process, the steering committee, in its report, proposed abolition. I was a member of the steering committee and I helped draft that report. And the JVP also supported abolition. But again, by that time, Mr. Sirisena was working with the SLFP again, also working with the Rajapaksas, as we saw in 2018, when he appointed Mahinda Rajapaksa as Prime Minister. So by 2017, end of 2017, it was clear to most of us that the process is not going to succeed. So those are very, very, I mean, it was very disappointing. But I don't think anybody will doubt that I have always been for abolition. I have written enough and more on this, have been blackguarded for taking this position, and I still stand by it. And we need to, and that is one reason I'm here. We need to push this, and we won't get a better chance. This is the best opportunity we will get, because there's a single party with whether it's good or bad for other purposes, that's a different issue. But at least for the abolition, the executive presidency, we won't get a better chance. So that is why we need to work towards it, pressurize the government to bring this proposal sooner and not later. And as I said earlier, we can even agree that Mr. Disanayaka should have the full executive powers till the end of the term.
Thank you, Dr. Kumarapperuma. Mr. Tegal, do you want to add anything?
No, I think in the questions there was perhaps only to reiterate the fact that it says that during the Aragaliya, some activists put out the slogan abolishing of EP, and then thereafter the voice, that there was no voice for this demand. I think there is a real failing on the part of civil society and those organizations that also work with their various constituencies and beneficiaries and people in failing to build public awareness, public understanding about these constitutional ideas. And there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in also not just talking about the constitutional ideas. I think the best reflection of that was in the PRC, the report that the others referred to by Lal Vijayanayakar and Dr. Harini Amarasuriya. They were part of Mr. Vijayanayakar chaired that committee looking into constitutional reforms, and they did consultations across the country. That report is fairly comprehensive, and when you listen to people, you understand what they want in terms of also devolution. It's not only a devolution, I think one of the questions said devolution, but also for the Tamil community, but devolution meaning for all communities, and how that power, devolving of that power, what impact it will have in their day-to-day lives, how it will make decision-making closer to the individuals who need to have that in their hands. And so I think that when you listen, you hear the demand in the everyday voices. But this failure to convert these everyday voices, the demands in the everyday voices, into constitutional principles and to build that connect, I think is really showing at this time. So we need to really strengthen that conversation and not polarize it between, limiting it to organizations, government, non-governmental, but build that connection and not alienate ordinary people from this constitutional conversation. I do believe that there was another question from one Khanna about a new constitution of this government will both abolish the EP and the provincial councils, and will that be good for the country and particularly for the Tamil community? I was wondering whether Dr. Jarampathy would like to respond to that, because that is a particular concern with the provincial councils.
Yeah, the executive presidency, the Sinhala supremacists who are against devolution want to keep executive presidency for another purpose, because the executive presidency can be used by them to suppress the other communities. And of course, they would like to dismantle the provincial councils. Ideally, they would like to, but it's not going to be easy. I mean, there is also the Indian factor, and it's not going to be easy. The Tamils and the Muslims and the upcountry, hill country Tamils are all against it. And there's a sizable Sinhala community, part of the Sinhala community, like most of us here on that community, who are against the abolition of provincial councils, and we are actually for more strengthening of provincial councils. But that danger is there.
Thank you. I think in addition, probably what we could raise about the provincial councils and 13th Amendment is we have to pressurize the government to come out clearly what their position is with regard to those issues. If they are going to abolish provincial councils and get rid of the 13th Amendment, then how are they going to address the issues of the marginalized communities? So they will have to openly discuss those things. And okay, let us move on to, there is another, Mr. Sundaresan says, thanks a lot. Unfortunately, one census executive president reluctant to create a separate column for us. Now, Dr. Wilson Naika from Canberra, he is asking, 16 years after the end of the war, the national question is still unresolved. When Deputy Minister Chaturanga Besinga addressed Sri Lankan expatriates in Canberra last month, sadly no Tamil or Muslim members were present. I asked him what the NPP government's strategy to resolve the national question and whether the government is willing to fully implement the 13th Amendment. Sadly, he said the government has no intention to implement the 13th Amendment at this point of time, and maybe this issue in the future in the process of developing a new constitution. I guess we are back to square one. I think the next question is probably out of this topic. It's not relevant to the issue we are talking about, we are discussing today. Is there any comments you wish to make? We have 7 minutes more to finish the session. So are there questions or any comments, Larry?
Well, Professor Willis was like a question.
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot speak for the NPP. I'm not a member of the NPP. I cannot speak for the NPP.
Yeah. I thought Mr. Upul Kumarapperuma will stay because he is sort of affiliated with NPP and he would have responded, but he's in Singapore and he had to leave. So, anyway, we can't respond to your question. But they have said that they will abolish.
Lionel, but I understand the frustration of people like Willie who have been always, I mean, we have always been for strong devolution, right?
Yes.
And we can understand. I'm completely with him on this, fully with him.
Okay, Brito has another question. Some say, other than under executive presidency, no solution can be given to the ethnic problem. As an example, other than Executive President JR, 13th Amendment would have come because South single racists would oppose. So he has to kill more people in getting the 13th Amendment. So any leader who wants to solve the ethnic problem will have to face the opposition from South racists. Yeah, obviously, sort of. But then everything depends.
I would like to respond to that. Can I?
Yeah,
Shall I
okay.
wait?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I mean, if you, in my PowerPoint presentation, I quoted from the manifesto. NPP manifesto said that they are for devolution. I can share it again. At least this is what they said. Devolution of political and administrative power to every local government, district and province, so that all people can be involved in governance within one country. So, and people have voted for it. People are given them a 2/3 majority. So you cannot say there is no mandate, and one cannot say that people are against devolution. At least going by the manifestos, right? So what they should do is to go by the manifesto to put that into practice.
I think that would also require addressing the question of with the transitional justice, accountability, all those questions as well. And I think those are important things to start the conversation on. I don't think it can happen. And when you talk about devolution, there is so much grievance underlying all of these demands that need to be addressed, acknowledged, which is why we keep hearing these demands in various forms and no satisfaction, right? Because there is no acknowledgement. And I think there is a silence in terms of the acknowledgement of what it means, how it can be done between Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim communities, and what happened in the past, and what the impact or what the consequence of the war was on people's lives. So when we talk about this devolution question, I think that is also really in the background, eating away, which we really need to also recognize. I mean, just the question of disappearances, how do you address that? And what has been the response to that by also this government? Land issue,
Yeah, thank you. With regard to racism in the South, I think we could take an example. I think when Mrs. Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumartunga campaigned, I think it was her first election or second, I can't remember.
95 to 2000.
Yeah, she campaigned in the South and she won. And actually she was more or less for a federal system. But it couldn't be implemented because the members of parliament were racist. So she couldn't get anything through the parliament. And so
well, Lionel, we could not implement it because Ranil Wickremesinghe agreed to everything, and finally at the last moment he cried off.
Yes, that's
saying
right.
that the proposals must be placed before the Mahasangha.
Yeah. Yeah. So that shows us that if we can build consensus in the South, there is a chance. If all the forces can get together, all the forces who wants to address these issues, if they can come together, but I don't know, the current government doesn't seem to be interested in doing that because they do not appear to be inclusive or consultative. So in that process, I think that the main deficiencies I can see, in the current process of what they're doing. And if they can be consultative and inclusive in their processes, I think in the South we can build consensus and we can defeat racism. I think we have come to the end of the discussion in the webinar, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Jampati Kumarapperuma, Ms. Ermiza, Tegal, for their contributions, and it was a very enlightening discussion, I think, that have brought many aspects that we need to focus on. And also, I would like to thank Mr. Upul Kumarapperuma and Ms. Swasthika Arulingam for their presentations and for their attendance. And I think one of the main conclusions we could arrive at is that we all have to work together in making the civil society more active. They have to discuss all these issues and try to build consensus. And even if the government is not taking the initiative, civil society can take the initiative. I think that was one of the suggestions that was made at the last webinar we held about the NPP. And so again, thank you. And so we will meet once more sometime in the future. Okay, thank you again.
It's coming through a hole